Chapter 28, Section 3, Interactive Reader, pages 445 through 450, 21 points. Minor bodies of the solar system, satellites of other planets. Key ideas. As you read this section, keep these questions in mind. How are the two moons of Mars similar and how are they different? How did scientists discover volcanoes on Io? What is one special characteristic of each of the Galilean moons? How do the rings of Saturn differ from the rings of the other outer planets? Page 445. Why do scientists think Phobos and Deimos are very old? What are the four Galilean moons? What are the characteristics of Mars' moons? Mars has two tiny moons named Phobos and Deimos. They revolve around Mars relatively quickly. Unlike most other moons, highlight, Phobos and Deimos are not spherical. Instead, they are, highlight, chunks of rock with irregular shapes. Highlight, scientists think these moons are actually asteroids that were captured by Mars' gravitational pull. At its longest, Phobos is about 27 kilometers across. Deimos is about 15 kilometers across. Highlight, both Phobos and Deimos are dark, like the Maria on the surface of Earth's moon. Highlight, Phobos and Deimos both have many craters. Continue highlighting. These craters indicate that many asteroids and comets have hit the moons. Continue highlighting. Scientists think large number of craters means the moons are quite old. Why do scientists think Phobos and Deimos are very old? Question 1. Answer. They have a large number of craters. They have a large number of craters. What are the characteristics of Jupiter's moons? In 1610, highlight, Galileo Galilei discovered 4 moons orbiting Jupiter. Since then, scientists have discovered that Jupiter has many more than 80 moons. Most of Jupiter's moons are relatively small. The largest of the moons are those that Galileo discovered. Highlight. These 4 moons are called Galilean moons. They are, highlight the 4 points below, Io, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto. Question 2, what are the 4 Galilean moons? Io, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto. Page 446. How was Io's volcanism discovered? Describe 2 differences between Io and Europa. Io. Io orbits closest to Jupiter. Highlight. It is the first body other than Earth on which scientists saw evidence of active volcanoes. Continue highlighting. An engineer discovered the volcanoes while studying images of Io that were taken by the Voyager spacecraft. Continue highlighting. Volcanoes on Io eject thousands of metric tons of material each second. Continue highlighting. The lava that erupts on Io is even hotter than the lava on Earth. Question 3, how was Io's volcanism discovered? Answer, an engineer discovered them. An engineer discovered them when studying images from Voyager spacecraft. An engineer discovered them when studying images from Voyager spacecraft. Parts of Io's surface are yellow-red. This color is evidence that volcanic material on Io is mostly sulfur and sulfur dioxide. Data collected by the Galileo spacecraft shows that, highlight, Io has a giant iron core and may have its own magnetic field. Io is one of the most volcanically active bodies in our solar system. Europa. Europa is the second closest Galilean moon to Jupiter. Europa is about the same size as Earth's moon. Astronomers think, highlight, Europa has a rocky core that is covered with ice up to 100 kilometers thick. That's approximately 62 miles. Spacecraft have made observations of Europa. From the observations, scientists have concluded that, highlight, liquid water may exist under the ice. Continue highlighting, if liquid water exists, it is possible that life might also exist on Europa. Question 4. Describe two differences between Io and Europa. Answer. Io has an iron core. Io has an iron core. Europa has a rocky core. Europa has a rocky core. Io has volcanoes and no water. Io has volcanoes and no water. Europa has an icy crust and no volcanoes. Europa has an icy crust and no volcanoes. Again, Io has an iron core. Europa has a rocky core. Io has volcanoes and no water. Europa has an icy crust and no volcanoes. Ganymede. Ganymede is the third Galilean moon from Jupiter. It is also the largest moon in the solar system. Highlight, the largest moon in the solar system. However, the mass of Ganymede is relatively small. The moon is made up of mainly ice mixed with rock. Images of Ganymede show that it is dark, crater-filled areas. It also has light areas that scientists think are long ridges and valleys. Highlight, Ganymede is the only moon in our solar system that has its own magnetic field. Page 447. How did Callisto's craters form? What is the main difference between Titan and other moons in our solar system? Callisto. Highlight. Of the Galilean moons, Callisto is the farthest from Jupiter. Callisto is similar to Ganymede in size, density, and composition. However, highlight, the surface of Callisto is much rougher than the surface of Ganymede. Continue highlighting. Its surface has a very large number of craters. Highlight next to the image, Callisto has more craters per square kilometer than most other moons in the solar system. Question 5. How did Callisto's craters form? Answer. It was struck by asteroids. It was struck by asteroids, comets, or meteoroids. It was struck by asteroids, comets, or meteoroids. What are the characteristics of Saturn's moons? Saturn has dozens of moons. Many of them are small icy bodies that have many craters. However, 5 of Saturn's moons are quite large. Saturn's largest moon, Titan, has a diameter of 5,000 kilometers. Titan. Unlike other moons in our solar system, highlight, Titan has a thick atmosphere. Continue highlighting. Its atmosphere contains so many hydrocarbons that smog hides most of Titan's surface. Question 6. What is the main difference between Titan and other moons in our solar system? Titan has a thick atmosphere. Titan has a thick atmosphere. In 2005, the Huygens probe gathered data about Titan's atmosphere. Scientists are using the data to find clues about how Titan and its atmosphere formed. The probe sent back images of Titan's surface as well. The images show signs of a flowing liquid, which scientists think is liquid methane. Saturn's other moons. Saturn's icy moons resemble Jupiter's icy Galilean moons. Highlight. Enceladus has erupting geysers, so scientists think the moon may have underground water near the surface. Continue highlighting. The presence of water could mean Enceladus might have conditions needed for life. Saturn's other smaller moons have irregular shapes. Page 448. Name 3 of Saturn's moons other than Enceladus and Titan. How did scientists discover most of Uranus's smaller moons? Question 7. Name 3 of Saturn's moons other than Enceladus and Titan. On the image, you can pick any of the moons listed other than Enceladus and Titan. There's Telesto, Calypso, Helene, Tethys, Dione, Rhea, Hyperion, Iapetus, and Phoebe. You can name any 3 of those. Pick them and list them for number 7. What are the characteristics of the moons of Uranus and Neptune? By the mid-1800s, scientists had discovered Uranus's 4 largest moons, Oberon, Titania, Umbriel, and Ariel. A 5th moon, Miranda, was discovered in 1948. Highlight, scientists have recently discovered many smaller moons using spacecraft and observatories such as the Hubble Space Telescope. Scientists now know that Uranus has at least 24 small moons. Question 8, how did scientists discover most of Uranus's small moons? Answer, use spacecraft and Hubble Space Telescope. Used spacecraft and Hubble Space Telescope. Neptune has at least 13 moons. Highlight, Triton, which is a large icy moon, is unusual. Continue highlighting. It revolves around Neptune in a backward or retrograde orbit. Some scientists think Triton formed somewhere else in the solar system and was captured by Neptune's gravity. Triton's diameter is 2,705 kilometers, and its atmosphere is thin. What are the characteristics of Pluto's moons? Scientists no longer consider Pluto a planet. However, Pluto has at least 3 moons. Pluto's largest moon, Charon, is almost half the size of Pluto. Because Charon and Pluto are so close in mass, both bodies orbit a common balance point called a barycenter that is located between both bodies. Highlight: Charon orbits Pluto in 6.4 days, which is the same length of time as 1 day on Pluto. Continue highlighting. Thus, Charon stays in the same place in Pluto's sky. In the same way that one side of Earth's moon always faces Earth, one side of Pluto always faces Charon. Pluto's other 2 moons, Nix and Hydra, are much smaller. Nix and Hydra are also orbit the barycenter between Pluto and Charon. Page 449. Why do you think scientists had to use very strong telescopes to discover Nix and Hydra? What are Saturn's rings made of? How are Neptune's rings different from the rings of other gas giants? Question 9. Why do you think scientists had to use very strong telescopes to discover Nix and Hydra? Answer: Pluto is very far away. Pluto is very far away, and the moons are small. And the moons are small. Pluto is very far away, and the moons are small. What are the characteristics of the rings of the gas giants? Highlight: each of Saturn's rings is divided into hundreds of small rings or ringlets. Continue highlighting. The ringlets are made up of billions of pieces of rock and ice. The pieces range in size from particle size of dust, the size of dust, to chunks as big as a house. Highlight: each piece follows its own orbit around Saturn. Question 10. What are Saturn's rings made of? Billions of pieces of rock and ice. Billions of pieces of rock and ice. Scientists once thought that the material in Saturn's rings was old as Saturn itself. Evidence now shows that the rings are much younger. Highlight: scientists think the particles came from a large comet-like body that entered Saturn's orbit and broke apart. The other gas giants also have rings. These rings are relatively narrow and thus harder to detect. For instance, Saturn's rings were discovered more than 300 years ago, but Jupiter's ring was not discovered until 1979. The table below describes the rings of the gas giants. Saturn, hundreds of small ringlets forming larger rings. Very thin ring system. Jupiter, single thin ring made up of particles that may have come from Io or another one of Jupiter's moons. Uranus, 12 thin rings. Neptune, a relatively small number of rings, clumpy rather than thin and uniform. Highlight next to Jupiter, single thin ring. Highlight next to Neptune, clumpy rather than thin and uniform. Question 11. How are Neptune's rings different from the rings of other gas giants? They are clumpy rather than thin and uniform. They are clumpy rather than thin and uniform. Page 450. Complete the table below to describe the special characteristics of the Galilean moons. How are Io's volcanoes different from volcanoes on Earth? Give one similarity between Phobos and Deimos. What is the main difference between Saturn's rings and the rings of other planets? How is Triton different from most other planets in the solar system? How do scientists think Saturn's rings formed? Scientists did not discover Jupiter's rings until 1979. What is the most likely reason it took scientists so long to discover Jupiter's rings? Question 1. Answers can be found on page 446 and 447. Row 1. Io is the moon. Special characteristics: volcanically active. Volcanically active. Row 2. The moon is Europa, which should fill in the box. Special characteristics already filled in. Covered with a thick layer of ice. May have liquid water under the ice. Row 3. In the box, the moon should be Ganymede. Ganymede. Characteristics already filled in. Largest moon in the solar system. Has its own magnetic field. Row 4. Callisto is the moon, already filled in. Special characteristics: most cratered moon in the solar system. Most cratered moon in the solar system. Question 2 can be found on page 446. They eject thousands of tons per second. They eject thousands of tons per second. The lava is much hotter than Earth's. The lava is much hotter than Earth's. Again, they eject thousands of tons per second. The lava is much hotter than Earth's. Question 3. Answer can be found on page 445. They both appear to be asteroids. They both appear to be asteroids. Phobos is larger than Deimos. Phobos is larger than Deimos. They both appear to be asteroids. Phobos is larger than Deimos. Question 4. Answer can be found on page 449. Saturn's rings are thicker and easier to detect. Saturn's rings are thicker and easier to detect. Question 5. Answer can be found on page 448. It revolves around Neptune backwards or retrograde. It revolves around Neptune backwards or retrograde. Question number 6. Answer can also be found on page 449. A large comet-like object, entered Saturn's orbit, and broke apart. A large comet-like object entered Saturn's orbit and broke apart. Question 7. Answer can be found on page 449. It is a single, very thin ring. It is a single, very thin ring.